Okay, so while Catherine is sharing the slides, I'll drop a link into the chat so that we can have a go. So if you click on that link, it will take you to one of the quizzes that we actually use, and you can complete it and you can see how we ran the Kahoots. Now we'd actually run them live, so we would do them together with the class. It would be a live Kahoot. However, the link that I've dropped to you is for completing it individually. We did make use of these links as assignments because if a student wasn't present in that lesson, then they can catch up, and it was quite a useful tool to making sure that everyone participated at some point. So if you click on the link, it will take you to an assignment, and then you can complete an example quiz.
Hey, Jose.
Yeah.
Is it all right? Can you see my slides now?
Yeah, it's visible.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm assuming that everyone's actually doing the quiz at the moment. So I'll give everyone a few minutes and then we'll just move on.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, so I think everyone's had a go. Should we move on? All right, so those are the 10 words that were displayed in that quiz. So you would come across these 10 words, and through the quiz, you'd be able to pick up what those words mean. So if we go into the next slide, Catherine. So this is an example of one of the tasks that they would have had to do. This one's quite a difficult one because it was later on in the year, and they've gotten a lot of practice at that point. And it was part of phase 3. So we had 4 phases altogether of the project, and this was the 3rd phase, and I'll go on to explain that in a moment. They were, for this task, they were allowed to use either third or first person narrative voice, and they just had to imagine that their character came across this object and that they were describing it. So they can pick the setting, and also there was a bit of characterization going on there as well. But all they had to write was a paragraph. So if we go on to the next slide. So these are the 4 phases of the project. So we started off with really simple first person narrative voice. And the idea was that they would just be describing settings. So be introducing them to 10 words that would be linked to a particular setting. And then they would use first person narrative voice to write a paragraph. Then that changed later on to being about character. So we'd put a picture of someone up. And then that would be a character that they had to describe, and that would have had to be in 3rd person. So they're also having a go at using different narrative voices. For the 3rd phase, which is what we just had a go at, it was about describing objects, so different types of objects. And then later we adapted it to non-fiction, and we looked at different formats and how we could use descriptive vocabulary for specific parts of non-fiction. So if we can go into the next slide. We did survey students after the second phase just to see what we could improve, if they were enjoying the quizzes, did they feel like they were learning from it, what sort of benefits did they feel like it had. 87 students responded. 99% of the responses were very, very positive. They found it very engaging. They did feel like it was helping them expand their vocabulary. They were coming across words that they were unfamiliar with, or they might have heard but didn't really know what those words meant. And they enjoyed actually writing the paragraphs because they were not only doing something engaging and picking up those words, but they were also applying those words to something, to a task. And that was the important part, I think, the fact that they were actually applying it. And it wasn't a very difficult task to complete. And as they were doing it every lesson or every first lesson of the week, that was a good structure for them to follow. So if we go on to the next bit. So this is an example of their responses to one of the questions, which was, what problems did you have when trying to take part in the quizzes when you tried to complete the writing task? How can these problems be fixed? So some of the things that they fed back to us, some said they didn't have any problems, some said it was the internet connection, some said not knowing the meaning of the words was a problem for them. So these are some of the responses that we got. And if we go on to the next slide, we can also see responses to another question. So how would you like to see the project move forward? What could come next? So we did ask what they wanted to see, etc. Some weren't sure. Some said they wanted to be introduced to different types of words, etc. And we asked those students later on as well what they meant by that. But the two things that we picked up on was that some of the students needed a bit more support with completing the writing activities. So although they were picking up the meaning of the words from the quizzes, sometimes that wasn't enough, and they needed examples. So they wanted to see those words used in example sentences. So that was one of the changes that we made, was to come up with a definition sheet with the definitions of those words and example sentences, which they can use if they were really struggling. And so that was only for students who were really struggling. We wouldn't give that to them at the start of the activity, only later on if they struggled, as a supporting tool. If we go on to the next bit. Also, teachers reflected, at the same time as we had that survey, teachers also reflected on their own experiences and what they wanted to see changed, and how we could improve the project. And apart from that definition sheet, which they all thought was a good idea, they also said that they wanted more emotive words to be included, because the students weren't really thinking about their emotions. They weren't thinking about using emotive language when they were writing for these tasks. So that was another change that we made as well. So thinking about how we could add more emotive words to the quizzes and apply that to some of the writing activities. We'll go to the next bit. So what kind of improvements we noticed? So we thought that the students had a better understanding of when to use descriptive vocabulary. So again, those high needs learners were being quite straightforward with their creative writing tasks. They weren't really using descriptive language, but they understood after doing these activities and these quizzes that they needed to use descriptive vocabulary more often, and where they needed to use those. They also learned, obviously they expanded their vocabulary. They were able to apply words to different types of writing activities as well. So they were able to apply the words that they learned to different contexts. So not just when they were doing creative writing activities, but also when they're doing other sorts of activities. For example, when they were doing analysis questions for section A, they were also able to draw upon that vocabulary that they were practicing for creative writing, which was really good, and it was very positive as well. We felt that they were more curious about learning new words, and they were excited about excited about doing the quizzes and excited about learning new words at the same time, which was very positive. It was very engaging for us as well. And as a department, we felt that, you know, it was a very good way of engaging with the students, and made us more curious about words as well, because we're thinking about what kind of words we can teach them next and what we could do to, you know, expand their vocabulary. And all in all, it was a very, very positive experience that we've decided to carry forward to the next academic year as well.
Thank you, Jose. I mean, in the meetings that you had with your team, I could see how engaged and almost refreshed teachers were who were taking part, and you know, it was clearly really effective. And I've stolen most of it for my teaching. So thank you.
I agree, Catherine. I often mention it in training now as well, Jose, because I think that vocabulary teaching and development, we often talk about wanting to do it, but it's very easy to do it in a way which is completely atomized, and what you did was you integrated it fully into what they were doing, so it became part of the writing process and not something that sat aside from it. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing today, Jose. If people have we're going to have to move on, but if people have questions, please put them into chat and we will field those.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jose. I'll move on then to Petroc. I think we know that all of our teams this year have had to deal with unforeseen events, and with Kate and Michelle leading the Petroc team, I've marvelled at how adaptable and resilient their team is. You'll probably agree that the ratio of students to teachers in English and maths in FE is a critical factor in success. I feel like I've spent the last 20 years trying to prize money from budget holders to allow us to invest time and energy on individual and small group work. And the nurturing element of our roles couldn't have been more needed than in lockdown. Kate and Michelle at Petroc have carried out action research to prove that investing in ALS and coaching in lessons will improve attendance and outcomes, let alone the learning experience itself. So over to them.
Great, thanks, Catherine. I think Kate's going to start sharing the screen. So while she's doing that, you're right, Kate? Can you hear me, Kate? Yeah, brilliant. So our project actually followed on from another OTLA project, our previous OTLA project, which was around Vesper. And what we wanted to do in this project was look at the role of the ALS intervention and the coaching further, and develop those Vesper strategies alongside the implementation of a different framework, like Catherine was saying, for the ALS. We'd always had ALS as a separate entity, really. They come into the lesson sometimes and they'd be with one learner, but a lot of the time the learners would go over to a different room for their ALS intervention. At the same time as looking at that, we also introduced what we called our instructors. So we had 2 hours of core delivery and 1 hour each week with an instructor for all our learners. Thanks, Kate. Throughout the presentation, what we'd hope and maybe if you could do this for us is pop in the chat what you think the barriers to learning were in 2021. When we started the project, we probably didn't anticipate a lot of the barriers that we came up against, but we'd be interested in your feedback on what you feel the barriers were to learning in 2021. Thanks, Kate. So I think Kate's going to now take over and talk to us a little bit about where we started from, and then we'll talk about where we went and what we learned along the way. You're on mute, Kate.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, we always knew that how you treat learners in FE is different, and the experience needs to be different from how they've had it at school. And this quote, we thought, backed that up in terms of that respect from their peers and the teachers. They feel that needs to be sort of different, and they see themselves as adults, you know, and we do teach learners from 14 to 19, and then adults at Petroc. So that was something that we felt was quite important, and that quote kind of spoke to us really. So that was something we've always felt we have to do, and then we were looking at how we could sort of develop that with the project. So why we needed to change, and we kind of want to go through this quite quickly, because what we want to talk about more today is the impact, because we've got quite a lot on that, and obviously that's the key thing, that our findings at the end. But generally, you know, the national average pass rate for English and maths is not particularly high. We've said these results are not high enough. Michelle is the maths teacher, not me, but when you've got 30% of your cohort passing, that means 70%, that's right, isn't it, Michelle, are failing for a second or third time. That is not good enough in our eyes, you know, and that's a national picture. We wanted to do something to address that. What we found was that repeated failure causes a lack of confidence, and learners just aren't really sort of confident in their own abilities or their own thoughts, and they're too scared to put them down, and that's either in maths or English. And they don't often know how to revise, so they can take notes, but then they don't know what to do with them. So that's where the sort of VESPA part of it came in. And we wanted them to rethink that word failure in terms of, you know, sometimes it's breaking down that negative barrier at the start with the learners, rather than them saying, oh, I failed at maths and English, to think about what went wrong and how can they overcome that. So that's what we were sort of working with. So in terms of our instructor hour, feedback that we had from our lead instructor, Nikki, was she is inspiring and motivational, therefore making the big feat of passing seem easier week on week. This actually was an email that went to our quality team that was then shared with us. And as I said to Nikki last week, for learners to actually bother to email in with a compliment means so much more, for them to have actually done that in the first place. We don't often get the compliments from the learners. So in terms of VESPA, and I'll sort of go through this quite quickly, it's something we've taken from Steve Oakes and Martin Griffin, so there is research on that if you want to have a look at that. But it stands for Vision, Effort, Systems, Practice and Attitude, and these are things that they've found through their own research that students need a combination of them in order to be successful. So we were building on that, which is something we'd already introduced. And as Michelle said, where we started this year was that we brought in the additional learning support into the classroom, which was online this year. So Catherine made a point about, you know, at the beginning about that sort of, you know, teacher to student ratio. At Petroc, at the start of the year last year, we had 650 learners sitting maths and a similar amount sitting English. So our average class sizes tend to be about 18. When that's one teacher with 18 learners, that can be, you know, quite difficult. And so the ALS teacher was in the class with us, so they would join the Google Meet, they would be part of the lesson, that we could use breakout rooms where if the students wanted a bit of extra support, they could ask, or we might identify, or the ALS teacher might identify someone that maybe needed a bit of extra support. We'd use breakout rooms. But it was also really useful, I found, for English, and I think Michelle did for maths, when the learners were working on things, they'd share a Google Doc and they would share it with me and Katie, who was the ALS in my class, and they knew that somebody could look at it in the lesson, give them feedback, because they had two different people to ask, so that if I was busy or Katie was busy, there was still somebody there. So in terms of that feedback, they found that really helpful. And then they would make appointments if they wanted to have one-to-one appointments to carry that on. So I think what we thought we'd get out of this is that there would be a bigger connection between what we did in the class and what the ALS teachers could do in terms of supporting, because very often those ALS staff members would have never been in a maths and English lesson. They wouldn't know what we were teaching that week, and they would just be doing, oh, let's do some grammar then, let's do some of this is English, let's do this. And it was very disconnected to what we were doing in the class. we thought that would be the only improvement, but actually we've got a lot of feedback that I want to kind of go on to in terms of what we actually achieved. And that was really around the learner's mindset and how they felt about English or maths at the end. And so, you know, we've got some of the feedback here. So one learner felt absolutely proud of himself by the end of it. Before, they'd never listened, wasn't motivated. They realised what had led them to fail and had addressed it this year due to this support. Some felt really happy studying English. We promised we did not bribe them for these, by the way. These are the genuine feedback from our focus groups. So that they feel that they've tried their best. And it was that kind of attitude, I think, that we managed to address more, because quite a lot of the learners, there's nothing wrong with their ability, it's their confidence that stops them from achieving. So if you can address that, then you will see more success. So they feel that they've had more knowledge. They're not a fan of English, but they still enjoyed the lessons. And I think that was the thing. Having two people in the lesson meant that for us as lecturers, we kind of felt like we had someone there to start the discussion. Or I said to Michelle sometimes, and Katie, at least I knew sometimes someone was actually listening to me, because sometimes at the start, when you're doing it online, you're talking to an empty, you know, the cameras are off. They were talking in the chat, and we found that actually they would be much more engaged because they'd start talking in the chat, or they'd unmute and they'd start talking to us. And it was just a much more relaxed atmosphere in the lesson, which allowed them just to sort of engage more. And, you know, they've identified the bond between you and the teacher matters as well. And they found that much easier, I think, to engage with. So the instructor session allowed them to be accountable for independent learning. Michelle and Julie are very good at their job. So that was Michelle and her LSA support. And something that actually we found that we didn't anticipate was, I'll go on to the next slide. I think I had it on there, or maybe we didn't, but it was that actually I think, yeah, it mentions it here. The motivation they had continued to help in other sessions, or as I realised I was doing better in English, I then did better in my other lessons. And someone else said they enjoyed EAP in the afternoon, having had English in the morning, it set them up for the day. So seeing that they were being successful as the sort of year went on had an impact on their entire learning, not just in English and maths. And I think that's something we didn't anticipate happening as well. And
the attendance as well, Kate, yeah. Because obviously we were completely online. So we went online in first lockdown, and we took the decision to stay online throughout the year. We were running some on-site provision for vulnerable learners, EHCP learners, etc. But for maths and English in the main, it was online delivery. And what we found in terms of attendance was that actually it improved. This improved it, having that ALS, that instructor, improved our attendance. And 80% of our learners had 90% attendance or above in our focused classes. And these were, you know, fairly large classes, like Kate was saying. And I think that was down to that ALS being in there, the use of breakout rooms, being able to put people with that ALS, the ALS and the instructor and the lecturer having that triangulated approach to it, meeting up regularly, talking about the learners, etc. And the learners feeling comfortable that they were being singled out for ALS. It was part of the core delivery. And I think that was key to it as well, is that they weren't having to go over to another room to get their ALS. It was all part of the core delivery.
Yeah, and it was learners that wouldn't normally access ALS were accessing it, or wouldn't have been normally recommended. I mean, there were SEN learners in there, but and these weren't learners. I think normally learners that are referred to ALS might be ones that are going from a 3 to a 4, and that's what you'd expect. What we saw this year was it was learners who they were at grade 2 or 3 because that was the requirement, but actually they've come out, and I know it's the teacher assessed grade, but the work that they've done consistently has made accelerated progress. So one of those learners has been tagged at accelerated progress. Obviously we can't talk about their grades, but you know, they have been put at much higher grades. And something that both Michelle and I, with Julie and Katie's support, were pushing was that aspirational target. and we pushed that right from the start, and we found that kind of, they just came along with us with it, and were aiming for much higher grades than they would have done in the past.
Kate and Michelle, I have to stop you. Oh wow, I'd love to, now we've seen it through and got the feedback, it's amazing. What I also loved was when I attended meetings, you had your instructor and your ALS member of staff, and you were all equals, and it was just lovely. And I really hope that people will be inspired by that and be able to take it forward. It's a fantastic project.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Kate, for today and all your work on the project. I think, as Catherine's just said, that triangulated approach was so powerful in your project. And I hope, if nothing else, other people take that away with them. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on then to South Essex and Joe. Another thing that I expect we universally recognise is that the English part of the maths questions often lead to misunderstandings and incorrect answers. And maths teachers saying it's not the maths, it's the English that's the problem. So Jo at South Essex commissioned her team to identify a range of strategies to address this. Now this was a different way of proceeding with the project, but I could see early on that potentially we could end up with a whole toolkit of strategies. The collaboration of English and maths teachers was a key factor in this, and I'm expecting that now these relationships have been made, this will lead to more collaboration going forward. So over to Jo. And unmute when you're ready, Jo.
I can't actually see what I'm sharing on my screen. I'm sorry, I'm struggling. I'm not familiar with Zoom. So I don't know if you can see my screen.
We can, Jo. It might be your viewing options. If you go to the top right-hand corner and put it on side by side, you should be able to see your screen as well as us seeing it.
Just trying to see. Can you see it as a slideshow?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, that's fine. It's just quite difficult. Okay, so our project, I've just pulling this quote up on the screen because it's quite a good one that encapsulated why we started off our sort of direction and what we chose in terms of our project. It was very much centred around the literacy levels of our students who are on our maths programmes. As a college, we are very large. We cover this area of Essex, Estuary Essex, and we have over 3,400 learners enrolled onto both GCSE maths and English. So normally we have about 300 more on our maths programme than our English programme, and all of our learners tend to do GCSE on study programmes. So if they're on a GCSE maths, they're quite often also studying a GCSE English as well. So the objective really of our project was around the GCSE maths attainment, but developing English skills, particularly around the problem solving questions. The project rationale was very much based upon evidence that we were finding from our own assessments and what we were seeing in our classroom practice, that a lot of our learners were really struggling with the longer maths questions. And a lot of them that were resitting, as I've said, were also resitting their English, and they weren't always at a higher level on their English to their maths. Sometimes they were on exactly the same level or slightly lower. And I think there was kind of a unified understanding that the mathematical English is quite often higher than everyday English. So the focus of the project was mainly on GCSE because that is, as I said, what most of our learners were on. And the approach that we took was that we asked for volunteers. So we sought expressions of interest really early on. We've got just under 30 lecturers working across GCSE maths and GCSE English at the college, alongside supporting on our functional skills programmes. But we felt that this was the best approach because we wanted to ensure that they took ownership for their projects and that they were engaged in what was being proposed. And what came out of it was kind of an action research project that adopted an umbrella approach. And we ended up with 5 GCSE English teachers and 5 GCSE maths teachers, which from my perspective was perfectly balanced, because we wanted to make sure that we had that collaboration going on. But when we put out the expression of interest, we weren't sure that we would get that uptake. And what it then allowed was a focus on the creation of sort of collaboration, evaluation among students and staff, everybody involved in the project, to start to look at sort of what impact could be made, what the barriers were, and really just do a big evaluation of their own teaching. These were the aims really, and it was to develop 1 or 2 strategies around the project period to encourage peer collaboration, because we are a large organisation, we've got 5 campuses, and it is quite often very hard to get that collaboration because everybody's so busy, and we wanted everyone to take a moment to share practice and do the things that practitioners should do. And it was really simple things that we wanted to start to maybe have a steer, which was just activities that could focus on vocabulary and technical terms in maths, introducing chunking down of questions, looking at dialogic teaching, and bringing in English terminology and vocabulary into maths lessons, and really asking our maths teachers involved in the project to stop thinking about maths and maybe start to look at English and the content of English in the papers. So I suppose one of the things when they first got involved in the project was to evaluate what they were looking at, and it was the common findings that they came out with. And these are just listed here, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with those common findings. The long maths problems that students were struggling with, the fact that they couldn't always process the information quickly enough. They quite often knew what the maths was, but they weren't clear of what the question was asking them to do because they were quite confused. Some of them didn't actually really understand some of those words. When it was unpicked, they really didn't know how to share their understanding of what ascending meant, even though it's something that they would come up against in a maths question. As said, one of the main areas of exploration of the project was to encourage that shared practice between maths and English tutors. And it seems like a really simple thing, but it's something that, you know, doesn't always happen as readily. And we wanted that collaboration, and that partnership approach kind of moved the project on, because they started to think not just only about supporting a maths teacher, but then they actually, as the project evolved, started to think about how could I bring maths into my English lesson. So we start to get this joined up approach and really embed the learning skills. And at the bottom, there's a quote there from one of our English teachers where she's basically saying that she started to embed the different terminology and different ideas coming out of maths into the English lesson. And particularly where she had shared students, which doesn't always happen, it allowed those links to be made between the students, that actually it is coming through into my English, it's coming through into the maths. One of our tutors took it one stage further and started to explore that with the vocational teacher, who also started to bring it into their delivery. Simple stuff that we talk about all the time, but they really started to put it into action, seeing the benefits. The project approaches were very much left. I had the overarching theme, and then the projects were set, as I said, as an umbrella approach, and I kind of left it that it was up to those partnerships to come up with the approach that they wanted to take, having evaluated their own practice. They are very simple, some of them, you know, just giving meaning to keywords and encouraging learners to start to answer the worded exam style questions, creating visual word walls in the classrooms that we used in Connect activities or as plenaries. Banks of words, vocabulary boxes, things that we'd normally use and see in English lessons being brought into maths. And then one of the other groups undertook reciprocal teaching and reciprocal reading techniques that would maybe be used in primary, and bringing that into maths sessions and exploring how they could develop that. So I've kind of captured some of the outcomes of the projects. It's quite hard. There was 10 people involved in these projects, and they said they each wrote or organised 5 individual projects. So bringing it all together in a 15-minute presentation has been a bit of a challenge. However, what I've done is just captured some of kind of the quotes that came out from their involvement in the project and what they were doing. So I'm just going to take a minute just for you to read some of those, and then I'll show you the resources. And the example on this slide is, you know, very, very simple, but it was something that was introduced at the start of every lesson, and it was introduced constantly throughout, and something that was starting to build confidence with the learners. And they were being asked to sort of unpick what those words were, and what does discount mean, or can you find an image that relates to that, or can you put that in relationship to what you're doing in your vocational practice, so that embedding of the terminology was starting to happen. This is one of the ones that was exploring reciprocal reading. So they started to look at doing some mini tests and questions. So every week starting to actually, as at the start of the lesson, putting one of those larger questions in front of the group of learners, so that they were getting used to breaking down questions and bringing in the techniques they were being taught around reciprocal reading, instead of just avoiding the question or not reading it properly. So it became like a weekly occurrence for those students, and they only got one question at the start of each lesson. This is one of the templates that was created from the project that did the reciprocal reading. So they introduced a template. We were working a combination this year of both classroom delivery and online delivery. So we had learners that were accessing online forms and methods that were being brought into delivery. This tutor introduced a reciprocal reading form where he was actually asking them to break down a question by pulling out first key point, second key point, third key point. Before they were even allowed to answer the maths question, they had to actually do the English part and look at what was being asked in terms of the question. Very simple techniques that we see in English all the time, just a mix and match activity, dominoes, where they're joining up the words or joining up the actual maths to the word and making the links that way. And this is the example of what the English teacher started to incorporate into her lesson, and vice versa, where they were just doing quick activities like word searches that included both maths and English terminology across the two lessons. And then, you know, getting them to provide definitions so that estimate is used in maths, but it's also used in English. From doing those activities, and as the project went on, and as they shared practice as a team around all the different strategies they were using, they started to recognise that these teaching strategies were helping learners to overcome those barriers, and that reading and the reading comprehension was kind of huge to a maths learner in terms of their confidence. And they did a lot of evaluation as practitioners to really consider, what is it that I'm doing in my practice that I need to change? And things such as I said, that seemed very simple at the start, like keywords on boards and having those mix and match activities, were really, really good for our learners, and they really responded well to them. We tracked the progress just by making sure that we had those two learners and evaluating the distance that they made. And we did that probably like everybody else through feedback questionnaires, through monitoring mock assessments over a period of time, through looking at any baseline tests and repeating those maybe 3 times to see, for those learners that are involved in the project, how they move forward, and also using those longer maths questions. They all noted a developing trend of growing confidence. They noticed that students struggling with English could now attempt those worded questions, and all tutors involved in the project appeared better equipped for those questions. The common outcomes were here in terms of reciprocal reading. There was more focus on breaking down keywords. Tutors made simple changes to English vocabulary and maths. There was an increased awareness of the importance of vocabulary and maths, and there was a discussion around how lessons could be encouraged to share a deeper understanding of learning between a maths and an English teacher. And this is some of the just quick captures of what our maths teachers concluded as a result of being involved in the project.
Jo, I have to jump in to say we're almost out of time.
Yeah, that's fine. I have finished.
It's fantastic, and I know people are going to want to know more. Is there a final slide that kind of, any questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, these are our next steps, having done it.
Thank you.
That's literally what I was going to conclude. I mean, it is a lot about the evaluation that the practitioners undertook, their findings, and I've got no doubt that they will start to embed that and take that further next year. And we're quite keen to sort of develop the reciprocal reading project further next year, because that was particularly successful and took on board a lot of elements of what everybody else was undertaking.
Brilliant.
excellent.
Jo,
Thank you.
thank you so much. As Catherine says, there was so much there in your project that is going to be of interest to people. I'm particularly pleased that you're going forward with the reciprocal reading as well, because there are people in this room who've heard me bang on about reciprocal reading so many times, but I'm a big fan because I think it really does help develop our learners' problem-solving skills. And that's just as relevant, obviously, for maths as it is for English. Brilliant. Thank you so much to everyone, and to Catherine for your presentations this afternoon, and to Catherine for supporting you through these projects as well.